Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Anthony, and welcome back to Let Me Be Frank. So, I noticed with this show, the last couple episodes, I've been talking about how season two is almost over. Season two is almost over. Well, now it officially is almost over. This is the second to last episode of season two, which is sad, but like I've said in the past too, I gotta take a break sometimes. We have another special guest this week, which is awesome, and we have another author. So I'd like to introduce you guys to Kergan Edwards-Stout. Hello, how are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
So yeah, let's get right into it. So, which actually, I'm going to show you quick before we officially start. I didn't think this. I thought this was going to come in another day or two, but today I received the book. So it actually just came
Wow.
in maybe like a half hour before we started. So that was really good timing.
So you read the entire thing then, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Between all this, definitely got it down. I'm ready.
Mhm.
No, I
Yep.
can't wait to read it. Some of the other authors that have been on this season too, I also purchased their books. I can't wait to read them all. And I'm going to try to do some book reviews too on them.
Great.
Yeah. So yeah, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. The way I like to word it too is if which ironically you wrote a memoir. So but if you were a novel, what would the back of your book say?
Well, it would say read the book, but you know, I am first and foremost a storyteller. I'm an activist. I am a dad. I've got two adopted African American sons who are now entering adulthood. Um, and the thrust of the book, which is, I'm not going to go too far into it, but the thrust of the book is the relationship I had that ended 20 years ago, but kind of I was married to a psychopath. And so that's just one part of my story. The bigger part is really how I've come through the other side and found happiness now, and in a great relationship now, and my kids are wonderful. So that's kind of who I am in a nutshell.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, what kind of linked me to your book was I can actually read it off the book now, is how it's called Never Turn Your Back on the Tide. And under it, it says, or how I married a lying psychopathic wannabe murderer and kind of lived to tell. Which I was like, if that doesn't suck you into a book, I don't know what else. I also I love the artwork too on the cover. It's definitely very attractive.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So yeah, so I don't know how much you can tell us about the book in general, but I was wondering if we could get a little taste. And also if you could, for audience members that might not know, because your book is a fictional memoir, if you could just explain a little bit too on what a fictional memoir is.
Sure. Well, I have led a crazy life. I'm 55 now. I came out when I was a teenager, which back at the time, was not really uh, very well heard of. So I tell a lot of my coming out experience in the book and my years in entertainment. I cast Jack Black in his first two plays at UCLA before
Wow.
anyone knew who he was or what to do with him. At the time, he was this scrawny little stoner kid. So
That doesn't
I've
surprise
had a
me.
great life, and yeah, not at all. But he was a great guy, and so the book kind of tells my entire life story, but the through line is really this relationship that went bad, and so I kind of tease it with the title, and then I kind of set the book up in small little stories. So I try to tell my story in an entertaining way, so that the reader feels like they're getting their money's worth. I didn't want this to be an autobiography where people just kind of say, and then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and or a typical memoir is, oh my God, I've had this terrible life, and woe is me, and I've come out the other side. And I didn't want the book to be that either. So the book really kind of uses that relationship as a tease and kind of a through line to keep the reader reading. But the book is a lot more than just that relationship that went bad. So I tried to come up with the most entertaining way to tell it I could. And you mentioned a fictional memoir. Um, Everything in the book happened except for one thing. And I'm not going to tell the readers what that is, but there's one thing that did not happen, but everything else happened. There are times where I use pseudonyms instead of the real names of people just for privacy reasons.
Yeah.
But I do tell stories about. I chauffeured Jennifer Beals around in my bright yellow 1970 or 68 VW Bug on a low budget movie, and so I tell about chauffeuring Jennifer Beals around, and I do tell like some Hollywood stories in there, but for the most part, if something's kind of delicate, I use just pseudonym, but everything is really pretty much true.
So I know you said you couldn't get into the fictional piece, but does the fiction that you did add to it, is that related to your 20-year relationship, or is that added to something else? Like, yeah, how does that kind of flow?
I do tell this relationship that was really bad. I'll just give you the headlines, but I married this guy, and we planned to have a kid together. We were together a total of 6 years, and we did adopt my oldest son together. And I found out that towards the end of the relationship, I found out that he had multiple relationships going on with people in other cities, and
Wow.
none of us knew about the other people. And one relationship he had with a guy in Northern California, they were together for a year. Another guy in Orange County, California, they were together for a year, and none of us knew about the other person. And at one point, when things were really getting bad, and I still didn't know what was happening, he showed up one day with a shaved head, and I later learned that he was telling people he had cancer and had to go through chemo and was going
No.
through radiation treatment. So he turned out to be quite a piece of work. And
Wow.
the hard thing about that was that relationship ended, like I said, ended 20 years ago. But the hard thing was, at the time, two guys in California, which is where we were living, could not get married. And so we had to adopt my son Mason um, under my ex, first of all, because he was the breadwinner and I was going to be the stay-at-home dad. And so when all of this stuff happened, he had legal rights to Mason, but I didn't have any, because I had to go through what was called a second parent adoption at the time. And they put the California Supreme Court put all second parent adoptions on hold. So some lesbians were fighting over something. So they put everything on hold, and I had no legal rights to my son. And so
Wow.
even though I'd been the one, nurturing him since birth and staying home with him, once I found out everything that my ex had done, I was advised by attorneys to keep my mouth shut until my rights were established. So for quite a period of time, I had to pretend as if I knew nothing about all his affairs. And when you're with somebody and you're trying to pretend that you're in this happy-go-lucky relationship, and all this stuff about them, it's a challenge. So luckily my rights were finally established, and
Oh,
I
good.
was able to move on with my life. But he was a thorn in my side for many years. So
That's how it is. Unfortunately, that's those
mhm.
certain people we come across and fall in love with. Sometimes they're draining us and they're holding us back, and a lot of other things that are probably in the book.
Yep,
uh, but
exactly, exactly.
I'm really sorry you had to go through that. I assume you're probably a much stronger person through it all, but it still is very unfortunate you had to go through that.
It's funny. Well, thank you, first of all. But I think, when I look at my life, I wish my parents had told me growing up. I had no idea how hard life was going to be. My parents kind of painted this really idealistic view of, if you're a good person, good things happen to you. And
Mm.
if you're a bad person, karma will get you. And I like those ideas, but um, throughout my life, I had a partner who died of AIDS in 95, and I'm HIV negative, but this is before we had any of the drugs that we have. And, being a caregiver and the day I turned 30, I checked him into the hospital and he never came out. So to go from that to this kind of crazy relationship to where I am now, where, I've got kids, I've got a great partner. Um, it's been a heck of a life, but I really thought it was going to be easier than it's been. Um, and part of the challenge too is when you've got kids, there's as much fun as they are and as much joy as they give you, they can be a handful too. So
I bet.
um, we've been having some challenges with one of our kids recently. So
Oh.
it's always feels like it's always something. I keep waiting for life to get easier, and it never quite does.
I can't wait.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
I
God.
know.
Yeah, and it's so true too. I think about that, kind of made me think about I grew up with a single mom and how she always was protecting me from the world and she didn't want me to ever get hurt and stuff. And same morals and values, similar to what you were told. And then, but life doesn't always go that way. And I remember some of the first times I'd get hurt, and it's one of those things like deaths where they almost come in threes. So all of a sudden it just felt like a bunch of dodgeballs were starting to hit me at once. And I didn't know how to process it and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, those moments suck, but then at the same time, they do make you stronger, and we wouldn't be the people that we are today, which is great. And as I look at the book, I'm so excited to read that book now. I'm
Well,
definitely excited.
it's funny. It's funny you say that because I really, yes, life has been hard, and I don't mean to make it sound depressing because it's not. I don't think life is depressing at all, but I think it's been more challenging. And I
Yeah.
will say, the partner who died in '95, we were together 2 years, and if I look at who I was before he died and who I am now, I used to be in my 20s. I was living in West Hollywood. I was acting and modeling and working in entertainment. And I was not a very nice person. I was
Mhm.
really that bitchy, sarcastic person you meet in a bar who throws you attitude. And at the time, I thought I was just being witty. But looking back, I had so many defenses and I didn't want people to get close to me. And so it was all, putting people down and showing them, I was, this person over here. And I realized I was kind of on a journey where I realized that um, I didn't like who I was. And I went to therapy and I had met this really amazing therapist who she was encouraging me to get out of my shell and get out of the Hollywood scene and try doing something for somebody else for a change. And so I started volunteering at AIDS Project Los Angeles. And this is, like I said, back before we had the drugs that we have today. And I started working in an education program there. I volunteered there for 2 years, and then I worked there 2 more years. And I think that's where I met this partner. And once I made that decision to give myself over to somebody, knowing that he could die and was likely going to die because when we met, his T cell counts were really low, even though he otherwise was in good health, I knew the chances were pretty high that he was going to die. And so I think once I went through that experience and I saw so many different sides to myself that I would never be a dad today if it weren't for who I am now. Like going through that experience and all that I learned about myself, and that I can kind of handle anything. And that came in really handy with my ex, who I call Eyes in the book. Um, when I met Eyes, I thought my first thought was, you went through this horrific death of Shane, and you were, for months it was all about taking care of him and being a caregiver and the grief process. And so when Eyes came into my life, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky. This is my reward for all the terrible things I've been through. But the strength that I learned about myself through my partner Shane dying really is what got me through that relationship with Eyes, because he, just having to kind of battle somebody when you can't really confront them takes a lot of strength. And so that was just a really, uh, pivotal moment in terms of making me who I am today. So yes, it's hard, but it's like if I was that, Hollywood sarcastic person, I would probably be really miserable.
Yeah, you are you able to talk a little bit about what it was like working in that industry?
in entertainment or in at working at AIDS Project
And
Los Angeles?
well, if you want to talk about both, but I was talking about entertainment.
So I started out wanting to be an actor, and I was directing plays when I was a kid. And so I started acting in high school, and I did a lot of the high school plays and, you know, did some TV movies and things like that. And kind of got my start doing commercials. And so I went to UCLA to get a theater degree. And it was there that I realized I wasn't really a very good actor after all, because I was with, you know, people like Jack Black. And I don't know if you know who Mariska Hargitay is.
I
She's
love
the
her.
star
Yes.
of, yeah, Special Victims Unit is her show, right?
Yep.
SV, yeah. Um, you know, so she was there, and
Oh my
you
God.
know, just really great actors. And you know, at the time we had no idea who was going to be famous and who wasn't. I would have never thought Jack was going to be famous. He was an amazingly talented actor, but you know, when I was at UCLA and I realized I was not that good of an actor because I was sitting there, you know, acting against or with Jack Black and Marcia Hargitay from SVU. And I realized that I was just not very good. And part of it was I think I didn't know who I was as a human being.
Mhm.
So I was all kind of posing and artifice and trying to act as if I had something to say and was a person who knew themselves and really emote. But I'd never really been sad, you know, in my entire life. I mean, I've been sad, but, you know, kind of the depths that I had to go through when Shane died really put me in touch with some of those emotions that we don't necessarily like dealing with, and opened up who I was as a human being. So like today, I think I'd probably be a terrific actor, but at the time I was terrible. In fact, one of my commercials I did was for Honda, and we shot at this Honda dealership in Hollywood. And I showed up on set, and I'm supposed to be playing like the teenage son. I've got brown hair. The woman playing my sister is a redhead, curly redhead. The guy playing my dad is a blonde gay guy who's so effeminate, and he's only like 10 years older than me. And then the woman who's playing my mom shows up on set, and she had huge, gigantic, swollen cheeks because she'd had root canals the day before and didn't bother to tell anyone because she wanted the commercial gig. So the guy who's playing my dad calls this woman. He goes, "Oh yeah, I know this actress who's going to be perfect to play mom," and she shows up and she's Hispanic. So the four of us are like playing a family at this Honda dealer, and I'm sitting, you know, for the big commercial. I'm sitting on this it's some kind of like off-road vehicle. Can't even remember what it's. Oh, they're called Honda XRs,
Oh yeah.
and so I had to keep saying this line over and over again. Basically, it kind of closed the commercial. And every time I would do it, I would try to do it really naturally. And the commercial director kept saying, "No, I need bigger. I need bigger. You really need to be bigger." And so every time I would do it, it would get bigger and bigger. And my acting was just awful. And so I would always say, Dad and I go Dad and I go trail riding on the Honda XRs together. And it was so bad that when the commercial actually aired in Los Angeles, all of the people who I went to school with would like make fun of me as
Oh
be
no.
walking the theater halls because they were all such great actors. And then they'd be like, Dad and I go trail riding on the Honda XRs. And I would be like, seriously, this is going to be my life, you know?
Oh no.
Bad acting, bad acting. And I'll tell you one other acting story just because it's funny. But while I was also at UCLA, this is during the era of Dynasty, which you're probably way too young to know much about Dynasty.
I I
But
actually I know it.
well, it's Joan Collins, and it's all big acting and fabulous outfits. And
Yeah.
I was hooked on the show, and I was a Dynasty fanatic. And you know, also being an actor, I wanted to be on the show really badly. And I thought, oh, I'm young, you know, this hot, attractive guy, and I'm gonna like somehow get their attention and be on the show. And one day, I saw that the guy who was the casting director for Dynasty was going to be doing a special cold reading class on campus. And cold reading is um, sometimes when you go in for an audition, you get to look at what they call the sides, which is the script, and you get some advanced time. Cold reading, sometimes you just walk in and they throw something at you, and you have to be prepared just to go act it as best you can, sight unseen, not knowing what you're reading. If it's a comedy, if it's a drama, a historical thing, you have no idea. And so the whole point of his class was to teach cold reading. And so I went to his class. There were about 100 actors in the room. And he really talked all morning long about the whole idea of cold reading and how it was so important that you just go with the moment and be in the moment. And so right before lunch break, he said, I'm going to have one guy and one girl from the class. When we come back from the break, you guys are going to get up and cold read for us. And I'm like, oh my God, this is my chance. I'm going to get noticed. And so, we went off on our lunch break, and all I could do was fixate on this character that I'd created in my head that I wanted to play on Dynasty. And he was going to be like Joan Collins' brooding, troubled teenage son, just kind of moody and constantly emoting and just, giving people withering looks and, coming down the stairs with like a sexy pout. And so I got this character in my head, and I kept thinking about it over and over and how I really wanted to impress this guy. And so we come back from lunch, and the woman and I go up, and we're given our sides, and we both start going. But I have this character in my head. I'm completely ignoring everything he just taught us about cold reading. And I am reading it like a bad TV soap opera actor, no, Shelley, you can't do that. What if he finds out? Just very dramatic, very heightened. And as I'm reading it, I'm realizing it's a really light, frothy comedy. And I am completely embarrassing myself in front of the entire room of actors and the casting director from Dynasty because I was so bad. But it's kind of like once I'd committed to being this brooding type, you can't just stop and start reading it like it's a comedy. You kind of got to go for it. And so I finished the class, and I finished the reading and went back to my seat, and I like sunk into that seat. And I could feel the other actors around me like moving away from me, like, oh, you don't want to catch his bad acting bug.
Wow.
He's so bad. It was just one of those mortifying experiences. But yeah, so I have a lot of tales from Hollywood, and there's a lot of them in my book that some of them are not, funnier than that, but lots of experiences in Hollywood. But I finally kind of realized that, I just did not want to bang my head against that wall. I think being an actor is really hard. I had some negative casting couch experiences with guys who were trying to, lay me, and it just kind of creeped me out a little bit. And I think, also as I was on my discovery of not wanting to be this sarcastic person anymore, I really realized it's a really it can be a humiliating business, very demoralizing. And so finally, once I started working at Age Project Los Angeles, that really put me on a new path, which I was grateful for.
Yeah. I mean, I always believe that everything happens for a reason. And I actually did a little bit of acting at my first school just because to get into, I don't know, just like with the writing and everything, I was more of like a creative, artsy individual. And I can definitely relate to, I mean, I'm only 28 now, even though I consider myself old anyway. But
you're not old, trust me.
I know, but some days it just feels like it. But my first school though, I was, like 18. And I definitely agree with looking back and really just seeing how I always think like 5-10 years, how you're always changing. If anything, I'm always changing every year, it seems. And just I can relate with the whole, I definitely was this bitchy, sarcastic. I mean, I can still be a little sarcastic, but I was definitely I don't know what it was. I don't know I guess I can't really blame like TV shows or anything like that. I don't know what it was, but it was just like this kind of thing a lot of us caught, that we felt like we needed to be like tough and bitchy to like maybe like a defense
Mhm.
mechanism or something. I don't know what it was. Maybe like some insecurities too. I was very insecure in myself. So compared to now, as we grow and go through certain experiences. So it is interesting how we almost have to act out a little bit as people, and then we kind of um shape into a way better form, better human beings that can, yeah, hopefully make differences in the world and stuff.
Yeah, it's funny, you mentioned just defenses and insecurities, and I think that's really what it was for me. I think I knew I was a pretty flawed human being, but I didn't want anyone to think that I was, and so I started becoming kind of a hyper aware, bitchy, put down other people so they don't get too close to me kind of person. And now it's like that's not who I am at all.
Yeah.
I thank God. But it's that's the difference between being your age and 55. You got a long long way to go, but the good thing is you can keep improving yourself. And I like who I am now a lot better than I did my 20-year-old self.
And same with me.
Yep.
Yeah, it's time to take a quick commercial break, so we will be right back. And we are back. So I still have a little bit more interview for you, and probably even an additional question or two, because as I was doing more research on you, I didn't even realize at first glance that you had other books published, correct?
Hmm.
So
Yep.
yeah,
I've
what
got,
are those, and what are those about?
my first book is called Songs for the New Depression. And the title comes from a Bette Midler album. And that book was really written, I wrote it 10 years ago, and it's a novel, but it was inspired by my partner, Shane, who died. And at some point after he died, in the first year or so, um, this line popped into my head, and I had no idea who it was or what it was meant. Um, but I just wrote it down because I thought, okay, that's a really interesting line. And eventually it became the first line in a novel. And it was really inspired. It turned out to be inspired by Shane. Um, it's kind of funny because we were just talking about our insecurities and that younger self. Well, basically, Songs for the New Depression is about a guy who is dying, and he knows he's dying, and he's trying to kind of make peace with who he is and the mistakes he's made. Um, Shane had a disease called progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, PML for short, and it basically is a lesion on the brain. And once he got that, within a matter of weeks, he would be walking and he'd veer off track. He'd be driving and he'd put on the brakes like too slow or too fast. Like he couldn't get a control of his motor skills. He started slurring his words, and basically it starts shutting the body down. And at the very end of his life, he couldn't communicate at all. And he was sitting there, laying in the hospital bed, and um, he was able to like listen to what everyone was saying and process it, but he couldn't respond. And I thought, that's an interesting kind of dramatic thing to have. And so the character in Songs for the New Depression gets that disease as well. So here he is trying to make peace with his life, but he's unable to communicate towards the end. And I kind of, like I said, it's inspired by Shane, but it's not Shane. It really, the character is much more of my bitchy 20-year-old self, um, where, he's angry at himself. He doesn't like himself. He doesn't like the world. He's just a very caustic wit. Um, and so basically the book, the first it's kind of told in three acts. So the first act is him facing his death. And this is not going to ruin it for anyone who wants to read it. But at the end of the first section, he dies. And then it jumps back 10 years earlier to where he's in those mid 20s, making a lot of those decisions that later affect him. Um, who he becomes, and then it jumps back another 10 years to coming out in high school, where you see kind of what ultimately was at his core. That kind of it's the whole book is almost like peeling an onion, where you get to really what made him tick, and you see why he was kind of the bitter um, person he was. And so that's the first book is Songs from the New Depression. And then I wrote a couple years after that, I put together a collection of short stories called Gifts Not Yet Given, which on the face of it, they're about holidays, but they're really not about holidays. I love holidays. I love, the fall and winter holidays, but these are about, each story is about a person um, facing some kind of decision. And it could be a small decision, could be a big decision. But ultimately, we see them in that moment where they're trying to, make a choice. And those things really, can have huge consequences. So it's really about, uh, they're kind of heartwarming stories. Some of them are, but really trying to get at what makes people tick. Um, and so that book, they both won some awards and stuff. And, um, you know, I'm very proud of both of those, but I think the biggest thing for me is this memoir. It's like, when you put your entire life down, the fact that right now it's getting, great response, it's really gratifying because, you don't know if people are going to read your book about your life and go, wow, you're an idiot, or I didn't like your book, or because it's your life that you're,
Yeah.
critiquing. So it's kind of a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, well, those other stories definitely sound really interesting. I like the whole kind of like how you said the analogy with the onion and peeling it back and where the story's kind of going backwards. That sounds really interesting. And yeah, the whole thing about whether people are going to like someone's life story or not, to me, at least who I am now, I'm just like, you know what? Fuck it. Like, like it doesn't matter, what they like, it's your life and you had to write about that. And like, that's your story. We all have our own stories. And yeah, I feel like that's awesome that you were able to get that out there. For me, I may have mentioned this in a past episode. I was working on kind of like an autobiography, but through poetry of my life. But then I kind of took a break on that because it was getting a little too real writing, even though it was just in poetry form. I was going into some certain dark moments in my past where I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not ready to have this out in the world just yet. But yeah. But yeah, we all have
Well,
our own. Oh,
yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. And I mean, the fact that even though this book, the memoir, you know, the bulk of it is about this relationship that took place 20 years ago, and it's like, I wouldn't have been able to write it a year or two afterwards.
mm,
I needed to get some distance from it. And, anytime you're writing about yourself, whether it's through poetry or journaling or whatever, it's, what you write at the time something happens is going to be vastly different than coming back to it with fresh eyes and,
very true.
you know, looking at it, a little more objectively. Part of my whole thing when I was coming up with how I wanted to write this book is, like I said, I didn't want it to be like a sad story, and I didn't want it to be. I wanted it to be entertaining first and foremost, so that the reader, enjoys the book. And so, figuring out how to do it took a little time, and then having the fresh eyes and objectivity that I do now helped too.
No, totally. That makes me think of with I'm not as good of it with it as I was a few years ago, but with journal writing, how you look back
Hmm.
and when you were writing in that moment and how like painful and raw something feels and how like your life was just ending. And then you look back at it like 5, 10 years later and you're like, why? Why was I thinking that way? Why did I feel that? Like, because you just don't, yeah, the feelings are completely different from those years later.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned with your past books how they won awards, and this, your new fictional memoir, also has won an award and is a finalist. It won the 2020 Indie Reader Discovery Award, and it's a finalist for the Next Generation Indie Book Award. What was your reaction when you found out you won those, and did you know that you were up for those awards?
Everything I've done to try to promote the book, part of what you do as an indie author is you apply for, different awards. And so these are the two that I won, and I was very pleased. I mean, anything you can do to get people to notice a book is helpful. So to be able to say, it's an award-winning book, that just gives you like one foot in the door. And so, I was very, very pleased. And, of course, just being a writer, I like to know that, you want people to like what you've written. So definitely take some pride in that.
Yeah, no, and that's awesome. It's definitely awesome to, I mean, I officially haven't published a book yet, but I assume it must be exciting to receive those types of awards and to see like on sites like Amazon and stuff how like you're growing in the like bestsellers rank and stuff like that. I'd be checking analytics all the time.
Yeah, definitely. It's just, I think promoting a book is harder than writing one.
Oh
Seriously,
yeah.
it's just, constant. I'm sure my friends and the people who follow me on online are just absolutely sick of me because, you're constantly like, here's a great review I got, or here's, some photos that kind of, tell the story behind the story. And, you know, at some point, I'm sure they're just like, Kurgan, shut up. But that's what you got to do to sell a book.
I was like, yeah, coming from someone who has had to like self market myself in various types of things, like, I totally get it. And everyone kind of has their little thing anyway. So for people getting annoyed, it's like, I mean, you're already getting like other people doing ads and other people with their businesses. It's like, it's everywhere. People got to make money. We got to pay the bills. And so we have to
Yeah,
work hard to get it out there.
exactly. Got to do the work.
Yes. So you mentioned that you were an AIDS and HIV, or that you are an AIDS and HIV activist, and you mentioned a little bit about your partner with that. Was there anything else that also inspired you to get into that work?
I think at the time I was feeling helpless um, because we didn't have the advances that we have now. And, being in Hollywood, there was a guy I was friendly with. His name was David Oliver. And there was a TV show called A Year in the Life. And it was like a family drama thing. And he played one of the kids, like a young, well, he was probably 23 or something like that. And we were friendly. And all of a sudden, at some party, I'm like, oh, where's David? Oh, he died. And I was kind of like, what? And then at some point, I dated a guy for a while named John Cantonwine, and really cute guy, always wore a tank top, muscly, just sweet as can be. Didn't really work out with us. We were just more friendly than anything else, but we dated several times, and then we went through this long stretch where I didn't see him, and um, I happened to run into a friend of his one time out at the bars, and I said, "Well, where's John?" And he goes, "Oh, well, John died a couple months ago." And I was like, "Oh my God!" And he goes, "Yeah." And his best friend Peter, and I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "He died like 2 weeks after him." And so I was at this point where I was seeing the impact of AIDS on people that I actually knew, and it was scary. I felt very helpless, and I felt like I needed to do something. And so combine that with trying to learn to be a better person and knowing that I was being really, I'd led a very selfish, self-centered life. And so that kind of led me to start volunteering. And at the time, I was volunteering for what they called the Speakers Bureau at AIDS Project Los Angeles. And so I learned everything there was to know about HIV transmission, and I would go to schools or wherever they would have me. And I would give speeches on how to protect yourself from HIV and how not to transmit it. And that was really, at the time, it felt important. It felt like I needed to be doing it, but there was also kind of people didn't know what to make of it. Like I went to a college once, and I had a table set up that had the AIDS Project Los Angeles banner on it, and I could see people not wanting to come to the table, like avoiding where I was because there was such a stigma around it. And so the more I volunteered, I eventually ran a program called Sex Essentials, which was the whole goal was to keep HIV negative men negative. And so we would go out to the bars and pass out condoms on the weekends. We designed this kind of a pictorial magazine, which was basically kind of like porn, which was very, at the time risque for an AIDS organization to be like putting out a porn magazine, but it was all, showing how to put on a proper way to put on a condom. And so, we were doing things like that. And we had, I created two characters, Biff Botham, who was kind of this game show host. That was me. And Latoya Latex, who was my assistant. And we would go out to the bars and stand on pool tables or wherever we could be and do like safer sex demonstrations. And we used to go to pride festivals, and I would pull a volunteer guy from the audience up and put a strap on dildo on him and roll a condom on the, dildo with my mouth. So, it was just like whatever we could do to get attention and to try to, keep people as safe as possible is what we did. We did anything we could think of. And then when my partner Shane died, it was hard for me to get to that same place again because, I was in the grieving process. And so I wrote several articles about what it was like to lose a partner and who am I now and that kind of thing. And we had a magazine that we distributed free to the bars all the time. And so I'd get letters back from people telling me how much, my piece meant or whatever. And I started to realize just the power that we have in telling our stories. And, we can actually change hearts and minds if we just keep at, telling our story. And the more authentic you are and the more you know who you are as a human being, the more impactful your story is going to be to others. And so it was really, a pivotal time for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's information that's so important to get out, especially to younger individuals that are just entering those dating scenes and stuff that think they know everything, but it's like, you don't like, just listen,
Yeah.
and
Well, even with PrEP, you just look at I know somebody who died of AIDS about a year ago. Like you don't think of people dying anymore, but that person actually became drug resistant, because of the years of the toll that, the drugs have taken on them. So, unfortunately, it's even though we've got PrEP and, thank God for that, but, the more the more educated you are, the better.
yeah. And what you said too about your friends, that it's not like social media was around where you could see like someone posting about their death. It just, kind of hit you out of nowhere. You had to wonder for so long to then
Yep.
someone finally tells you they're gone. That must have been awful to go through.
Yeah. I mean, it was just kind of like people disappeared. You'd go, if
Yeah.
there was a bar that you went to regularly and all of a sudden your favorite bartender is not there anymore. And you happen to ask and they're like, oh, well, you didn't hear? No, I didn't, it was definitely a dicey time, I think for me in some ways, not being in like an epicenter like New York, West Hollywood was definitely bad, but I was also young enough where I hadn't really been out very long. Even when I was kind of coming out, I knew about AIDS and, I'd seen the articles. And so I knew to, keep myself safe and, but it also kind of meant that I was probably more prudish sexually because I was scared of getting it. So it's like, I would have loved to have had a lot more. I had plenty of sex in my time, but I would have loved to have like had even more and, had my 20s just be like one big fuck fest. But,
Yeah.
I coming out when I did, it was like, okay, I'm going to date you first. And, if this goes well, then we'll have sex and see if it works. And, but there was usually a date involved. And, I mean, ultimately that served me well. I think that probably is one of the reasons I am still negative is that I didn't go, hog wild.
If it makes you feel better, my 20s have not been like crazy, like the average individual, I guess we could that we would think about.
Well, and you're a handsome guy. So I'm sure
Thank you.
like after we're done with this interview, people are going to be lighting up your social media and being like, "Hey, I heard you're really cute. I want to date you."
I mean, guys, I didn't know we were going to go this way, but guys, I mean, people do creep in the DMs and stuff. People do that. It's just, I know what I want from someone, you know, when you go through certain heartbreaks and you're like, okay, like I don't want that specific shitty thing to happen again, or this specific shitty thing, or like, I don't need another thief in my life, or etc. You know, so all those
Yeah.
different scenarios you can get. So I really, really, getting to know someone is so important to me. And I wish it was more important to other people instead of just the typical, well, top or bottom, you know, like, no, like, can we
Yeah.
actually like get to, I want to know who you are for, like, I want to know your character. Like, it doesn't, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, just a sexual position isn't
Well,
going to define who you are.
I can't imagine being single at my age right now with just the hookup apps and everything. Cause
Yeah.
it's like, I was very much traditional, like, you know, you go on a date and you might go see a movie, you know,
Yeah.
and you might
No.
talk about the movie afterwards. Like there's a process here. And okay, maybe we'll kiss, you know, and instead of, you know, you get these headless pictures and you're like, you think I want to have sex with a headless picture? Like I'd like to know more about you first.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I would utterly fail at the whole grinder or scruff meetup thing. I would just be awful at it.
And now with like added technology and stuff too, it's just like you don't really get the eye contact anymore. The whole like people genuinely, or at least it's not as common, people genuinely wanting to know who you are. Like it's almost, yeah, it's almost like more just like they got to get the fix, the sexual fix.
Well, it was funny. My hubby and I went to a gay bar here in Denver the other night, and you know, they're the way they're doing the bars here, and I don't know what it's like other places, but they kind of are treating it like a restaurant where you have tables that you get assigned a table, and
Yeah.
you can't just go and meander like a regular bar scene. So it's very safe and all that, but it's amazing how many of the guys are like looking at guys across the room and then, you know, picking up their phone and seeing if they're on Scruff or Grinder so then they can read
Yeah.
about them. It's like, it's a whole different, you know, just adds a different level onto, you know, just dating. But it was funny.
It's, yeah, I mean, I think it's the new, I remember when I was younger, I used to always be like why can't everyone just wear signs to know like who was gay and who was not and this and that. So I think that's the new way of discovering. It's like the metal detector for gay people. Like, oh, he's a gay.
Yeah, that's funny.
But we're gonna take another quick commercial break. We will be right back. And we are back. So before we get into the last little part of this interview in this podcast episode, I know there's going to be links in the description of the episode for Kurgan, but would you like to just tell quickly your social media links and websites and stuff that people could follow you on?
Sure. On Facebook, if you look up Kergan, Kergan, Edwards-Stout, all one word, that's my author page. You can follow me there. I'm on Instagram at Proud to be Dad, ProudTobe Dad. And I'm on Twitter at Kergan Edwards. And then I've got a website, which is my full name, Kergan Edwards Stout. There's a hyphen in there, Edwards-Stout.com. So people can reach out to me in any of those places. Happy to connect.
Perfect. So yeah, after your fictional memoir and everything that you went through in that book till now, like what's going on currently in your life, the new updates?
Well, you know, I mentioned that with the Evil X story, we'd adopted a son together. And
Yeah.
my son Mason is now 20 years old, hard to believe. Um, Soon after that relationship ended, I met my new husband, well, my new husband, current husband, Russ. He's not new. He's been around 18 years.
I mean, he'll
So
appreciate that
um,
comment.
yeah, yeah, he's old. He's really old. No, but we were, you know, after we got together, We adopted another son, Marcus, and he came to us through foster care. And so his situation is very different. Like Mason was adopted privately, um, whereas Marcus, he came from foster care at 2.5, and has his share of issues. His mom had taken him to a crack house that was raided, so he
Wow.
got put with child services, and they kept trying to reunify them, and she would never do her drug tests, and so we got Marcus when Russ and my relationship was still pretty young, and so he is, geez, he's now 18.
Wow.
Um, so he's a senior in high school, and you know, Russ and I have been together for 18 years this month, and I've really been focused on writing. And I don't know, I know you're a writer as well, and I don't know how much you know about how much money authors make. The answer is not a lot. So unless you're like a Stephen King, you've got to have a day job. And so I've
Yeah.
worked in marketing, and I've been working in marketing for a long time. So I do everything from writing press releases to doing people's social media, and anything that I can write and get paid for, I will do. So that's kind of my day job. But we're at an interesting point in our lives now where our kids are finally almost out of the nest, and Russ and I are trying to figure out where we want to go next, and do we want to stay in this beautiful town that we live in, Evergreen, which is in the mountains outside Denver? Do we want to downsize? Do we want to travel? And it'll be interesting to see what happens in November. But my nerves have been shot over the last 4 years, just watching the political mess unfold. And if things don't go the way that I'd like them to go, who knows where we might end up? We might, if we can actually get to Europe, we might go there and stay there for, a huge chunk of time or something, if they'll actually let Americans back in. But so, we're trying to figure out the next phase of our life. And I have no doubt, we were talking about our ages earlier, and, my dad is 93. My mom died recently at 90, and I'm 55. So, you think your life is long, and you think like, I feel like I've had a really full life. And just to think that potentially, given my genes, I could be around like 35 more years is kind of scary. Like I have no idea, I want to be around, and I'd like to see our kids, if they eventually have families or whatever, I'd like to see them into adulthood, and
Yeah.
if grandkids and all that. But just, it feels like I have this whole new chapter is opening up, and I have no idea where it's going to go. And hopefully it'll you know give me lots of pleasure, and bring me some enjoyment. But you know anything can happen now, and probably will.
Oh, especially, oh my God, especially in 2020, out of all years, this year has been such a wild card year.
Yep.
Um, what I just thought of this question with your children and everything, how's it been raising children, a being a gay father, with the law and how the laws have changed over time? Like what has been your experience with all that? Because I know there was like the custody issue too back then. And
Oh yeah, yeah. And part of the whole thing with my ex that the book focuses on is kind of the inequity that back at that period of time, LGBT people didn't have the same rights as straight people when it came to adoption and marriage and whatnot, and that really put me at a disadvantage. One of the interesting things, now, even over the last many years, my ex and I have had court battles. Even though I've been the primary caregiver and all that, we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on court battles because my ex is, like I said, a lying psychopath. But we've had our share of ups and downs. With the kids, though, it's been really interesting. Like we used to live in conservative Orange County, California,
yeah.
and two white gay dads, two black kids. We every once in a while, I would see somebody giving us like a weird look.
Mm,
But usually, I think they were trying to figure us out, not necessarily,
in a hateful
that they
way.
were looking at us. Yeah, yeah, and usually people were pretty, open. And um, when we moved here to Colorado, I mentioned the town. It's called Evergreen. Our kids, they were teenagers at the time, and they call it Everwhite because it is really very, very white. And I think the racial thing for them has been more of an issue than the gay thing. Like having gay parents just kind of made them cool. Like at the high school, people were like, "Oh,
Well,
you
that's
got
good.
gay dads? Wow!" And I think for them, initially, just being black in this environment was kind of intriguing too, because there are so few black people. The kids were looked, and the kids here look at black people, black culture, rap musicians and stuff, and they idolize them. So like when my kids went to the high school, even though there were only a handful of other black people there, um, they were kind of like little stars. But at the same time, they've had a struggle trying to find their identity because this isn't a very diverse place. And um, so that's been, a bit of a challenge. And it's interesting. My older son, Mason, he's in college right now. And in addition to getting his degree in exercise science, he's been really looking into the black culture more, and really learning about the injustices that people of color have faced, and learning more about his heritage. And so for him, this has really been a time of awakening, especially with the riots and whatnot.
Mm.
Trying to figure out who you are when you didn't necessarily grow up in a black environment, but as a black man navigating, today's world with all the many challenges. It's been interesting to watch him and his journey.
That's yeah, I mean that's awesome. I find it interesting that and I'm happy that your kids had more what sounds like a positive experience through school. I think about I when I was in high school and middle school, it was predominantly white students. And I mean, I was school choice myself, but I also am white. So it wasn't as challenging as someone who was school choice and they were African American coming into the
Mhm.
situation. I know I saw, at least in most cases, that it wasn't as accepting. Unfortunately, they kind of, you could tell they were going through some serious obstacles just for the color of their skin, something that they're born with. They can't control that at all.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, I think for the most part, I don't want to say that it's been easy for them, but I think we've been pretty fortunate that we have not had too many issues. But one thing I found out later is when we first made the move to Evergreen, we reached out. My older son is a great football player, and so we reached out to the school and the football coach there and said, hey, we're going to be coming. And so of course they looked him up online and saw his film and stuff like that. But um, we only found out recently that the coaches then had a team meeting to ask the team, like, are you guys okay with this black player coming with two gay white dads? And I was
oh
like,
wow.
what the fuck? I mean, that's
Yeah.
like, I don't even know, can't even begin to really address that. But luckily we found out only recently after my son had graduated. And I was like, wow, that's, I didn't think things like that even happened anymore, but
Yeah.
clearly, they do.
Yeah, I mean, what should have instead what should have happened was maybe some sort of education into being able to accept others that are different from yourself in that situation. But it's so strange to me that it ends up being like oh no, like, is this okay? Like, these people are different. Like it's just, yeah, it's definitely approached the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, we all, meeting different people should be exciting for us.
Yeah.
Having interesting conversations with people who are not like us should be an adventure. It should be enriching, and instead of looking at it as something to be afraid of, or like, oh well, I don't want to have that conversation. And I think if anything can be said for the last many months, with the unrest over police brutality, you know I think it is allowing some people to have conversations that they didn't necessarily want to have. Some people are just going to put their walls up, but I think, there's a lot of people who are realizing only now that they do come from that place of privilege, and it is, it will enrich them to learn more about this, struggles other people have faced, and, come out richer for it. And that's exciting to see.
Yeah, no, I want to say it's the episode before this one. I've had a lot of different types of guests too, and the guest before this episode, she talked about how I grew up like more low income, and so did they. And she said something that was very insightful related to that, how even though we had those upbringings, we still are considered privileged. And she was right in a way. Like even though I didn't grow up in the best neighborhood, it could have been so much more worse than other situations out there. Like there's so many of us out there, we could always have it worse. Like we could also have it better too, but there's some really awful situations and other things too with certain people where you're born a certain way that you can't control, that they do face certain hardships that, I think about myself that I can confidently say I never have to go through, fortunately, like with certain hardships related to, like, yeah, I mean, I wasn't born straight, but I also, was born the skin color that for so many years has been viewed as the most acceptable to society.
Yeah. Yep. Well, it's like I think my hope for all of us is that we can open ourselves up to new people, new experiences. And years ago, when I first started signing books, I came up with this kind of inscription that I used to write in books. When somebody comes up and you don't know who they are, it's one thing to write an inscription to a friend or whatever. But when people would come up that I didn't know, I started writing, tell your story, live authentically, change the world. And I really think it's having those hard conversations and being honest about who you are and being open to meeting people at that level where you can have real dialogue, just like you're doing with, you know, um, your podcast. Having those conversations can really open people up and create some positive movement. So I'm glad you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, some of the guests have had different beliefs or views than I have on certain things, but it's still interesting and I think important, like you said, to have those conversations and to at least, even if I don't agree with what someone says, like everything on what they say, I think it's still really important to at least listen and understand on both sides where the other one's coming from. So you're at least like, okay, I at least get why they think the way they do. I don't agree with it, but I get it. Like I can at least,
Yeah.
Instead of just like screaming over one another and not, getting anywhere.
Yep. I totally agree.
But yeah, so let's close the show. I have one more question for you, just for any aspiring writers, authors out there. What is there any advice that you can offer to anyone who hasn't published yet, or any advice to just someone who writes in general?
Well, I'm a big theater lover, and one of my favorite uh, lyricists and composers is Stephen Sondheim, and
Yeah.
um, there's a great line from one of his plays, a musical, Sunday in the Park with George, and it's about this painter, and the painter in the second half of the show, he's struggling. He's an artist, and he's struggling with kind of being blocked. And this always is what I think of when I get blocked, or if I'm feeling like I don't have anything to write about or whatever. And his muse is this woman, Dot, and she's standing next to him. And he says, I have nothing to say. And she says, you have many things. And he says, well, nothing that's not been said. And she says, said by you, though, George. we all have, you may think of your life and you may think, well, what am I going to write? Who am I? Well, we all have stories, and it's how we tell them and how our unique individual outlook on life fuels what we write, that makes every story unique. So yes, there's only 100 stories, but it's your personal take on it that's going to make it interesting. So um, I hope writers out there will, or aspiring writers will go, yeah, I do have a story, and it's important that I tell mine.
That's, yeah, great advice and an awesome way to end this. I want to thank you so much, Kergan, for being a guest on the show.
Thank you
And
so much. It was great fun.
oh, no problem. And I want to thank today's sponsor for the episode. I want to thank Zapfire, who does the intro and outro music for season two's episodes. And I want to thank each and every one of you out there for watching, for listening, for sharing, and for supporting. Thank you guys so much for all that. I hope all of you have a super special, awesome day, and bye.